Hey everyone, Ellen here, and welcome to another lesson in Washington watercolor. So for today, I thought it would be great to work with complementary colors. And you may ask, what is a complementary color? Well, let me just show you here. Here I have a color wheel, and complementary colors are the opposite colors on a color wheel. So the opposite color of red would be green, yellow would be purple or violet, and orange would be blue. And it's really easy if you think about it, because there are three primary colors, so yellow, red, and blue. When I combine two primary colors together, like yellow and blue, I'll get a secondary color, green. The other primary color left out of that would be red, and so that is the opposite color for the complementary color. And sometimes when we put complementary colors together, they just make for a beautiful color combination. But the other cool thing with complementary colors is when we mix them together, so if we mix green with red, we'll get something that is neutral, so something that is either leaning brown or gray. And so you can really make a beautiful full painting just using a couple of colors. So here we have a lesson for today, and I love these radishes. So we have this really nice picture of radishes tied with a little bit of string, so we can see their complementary colors, and we can see that there's green along with red. And to the side here, I've made a chart, and it's similar to the chart I did last week, and I can leave a link of that video in the description for today. Last week I did a value chart, so this week we're going to work on a complementary color chart. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I have 7 squares, so maybe we'll have one full red, one full green, and then I'll have one halfway that's half and half, and then we'll kind of work our way up and down from there. And I do have a couple different reds. So over here, I have a warmer red, which is Windsor red. I have quinacridone magenta, which would be a cooler red. I have perylene maroon. It's kind of like a darker-ish red, and it doesn't lean as purple as or violet as the quinacridone. Over here, I have sap green and I have perylene green, so 2 greens. You know what? And I hate to say this, but I'm going to be working with all my reds and all my greens, and perhaps I'll even mix up a green that has a little bit more yellow and pull from my Windsor lemon there. All right, so let's just see how this goes. And in my hand, I have my trusty Beaver paper towel, and I have Rosemary series for 2 pointed round brush. So we're just going to just play for a minute. Before I even get over to my color chart, I'm going to put my red there, my Windsor red. And I'll come over with some perylene green, and we'll mix that together. And we'll just see what that looks like. And that's pretty nice. Let's just grab quinacridone. I don't want to commit over there to do more than one color chart. And we'll come back in and get some perylene. Look at that's almost the background color. So I think I am going to favor this combination, though I'll be throwing in some of the other colors. All right, let me rinse that out, and let's just grab some quinacridone, a little bit of water, and we'll just paint in this top square. So that is really pure quinacridone magenta. And down here, you can grab some perylene green, add a little bit of water to this so it's fluid. And let's just paint this bottom square. Great. I think that looks pretty good. why don't we take some of this and mix it together. It's hard to do a perfect 50-50. A little bit more green. I'm looking to get something that's just neutral, a neutral gray or neutral brown, depending upon the colors I'm using. So right in the middle, look at that. That's just a beautiful, beautiful gray. All right, so now we can either work up or down. It doesn't really matter, but I can over here and maybe add a little bit more green to that mixture. Maybe we'll just get a little bit more green, a little bit more water. Pretty good. They're very similar. I don't want to play around with the top one too much, but maybe I'll just put just a little bit of red into that one. Okay, I feel that looks nice. And now, let's grab a little bit of that quinacridone. Add that here. Now you can make several charts, complementary color charts. You can switch up one of the greens, you can switch up one of the reds. And it's all good learning. It looks really nice. And now let's just do a little bit more. Well, there you go. That was pretty easy. And now you can see just the beautiful range that you can get with only two colors. Okay, so let me move my reference photo to the side. And over here I have drawing. And I can tell you, it's not accurate, I'm sure. The nice part when you're actually drawing something is, and not tracing, is that you can change things around a little bit. Sometimes I think when we trace, things get a little bit too rigid. So for example, where this little root is pushing off the paper, or I curled it up. So I just can manipulate things a little bit more when I'm drawing. And honestly, it's not a portrait, so I didn't put a ton of time into it. I didn't fuss with it. Typically, when I'm working watercolor, I really like to work my background first, only because this requires a lot of work. And if you're successful with this and you've waited and then you put in your background, let me just tell you, there are so many things that can go wrong when you put in your background that it's just easier, I think, to get it over with first, and then you can move on to other things and maybe go back and tweak the background a little bit. So I want to mix up a fairly large batch of watercolor. Now I can look over here and wow, that 50-50 is really great. So we'll get into some of the quinacridone. I'm going to put it here. More water. Okay. And let's get into the Ellen green. And I really want to get that, just that nice kind of gray neutral look. That's not bad. There we go. I just want to add a little extra water into that. And that's pretty good. I think I could use a little more. So if you're painting a background, really what you want to do is mix up way more paint than you think you need, because chances are you will run out of paint. Let me just grab some paint here, and as carefully as I can, I am just going to paint around the leaves. And I just want to keep that edge moving, and as carefully as I can. This is why I like masking fluid. It makes this job like so much easier. Let's just keep all those edges kind of wet and moving. And sometimes when there's a little white bit that is left, I kind of like that, so I might just leave that. Okay. Maybe I'll give that a few little friends. There we go. Okay. I don't even understand my drawing here, but I'll do my best to go around. Okay. I am going to just rotate the paper. Another little speck that's there, and I will leave that. As you can see, I am close to the end, but I am also close to running out of paint, so I think I'll make it, but I am sweating it out just a little bit. I think that's it. Okay, so my background should be fully dry, and I'm just going to clean a spot over here, palette. This time, I'm going to pick up some sap green, and I will add just a little bit of water to it. Maybe a little bit more. It's not bad. More water. Okay. This time, what I want to do is just put a holder in for all the greens, the stems and the leaves. So I'll show you what I mean by that. Let's just go over here and where the stems are. I'll just add in the lightest wash of green. Bring it right into some of the crevices. There. That looks pretty good. And just to the other side, I'm going to do the same thing, just a very light wash of green. So I just wanted to get this lighter value in, just so I kind of have my bearings where the color green is going to be. Now I know things will get a lot darker. This will dry light, and they probably won't get any lighter. But this way I know not to go into destroying, which I love that area. Definitely avoiding that. It went a little messy. I went in a little bit into it, but I think it should be okay. All right, so that looks good. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. I do want to make sure these are dry, so I'll quickly dry it with a hair dryer. Okay, that should be good enough. Let me just clean out the spot over here. There we go. And I'm going to come back to my quinacridone, such an amazing color. Really water it down. Again, I want this to be really one of my lightest lights. I know there are a few highlights in the centers. I may lift up for those, but let's just put a general wash on these. A little bit of a wash. Hey, if you're just starting out in watercolor and you get this far, wow, look what you've done. You can see it really looks like a bunch of radishes. It's awesome. All right. And I can rinse my brush off, wipe it off, and I see there are just a few highlights. And just wipe off some of the paint. Good. I think that looks really nice. Okay, so we are going to dry this. I'll probably jump back into the leaves. I have made a few mistakes where I've gone either over the edge so I'll try to clean that up a little bit, and we'll get the leaves in, and then we'll move back to the radishes. Okay, so is mostly dry, and I'll move on to back to the stems and leaves. I think one of the things that is the most hard with watercolor is just you're always working the negative space, and I think for some people painting around something to create a thing, like that whole concept, I think is really, really hard for some people. I know I can struggle with it, so but that's what we're going to do. We're going to end up working around the lighter stems, and by getting the darker spaces, we'll create the positive areas. So let's just see how this works for a minute. So I'll just come in this way, and I've mixed some of my perylene green in with some of my sap green, and carefully we'll go around the stirring here. Let's just at the edge of this leaf in. And you can see by getting this darker, actually it's making the stems, the lighter stems, just pop right out. And add a few little splotches here and there of darker perylene green. And then I can kind of push it around a little bit with my brush, but also let it do its own thing. I think that's going to look really nice. Let's just get right to this edge. Pretty. Okay, and then we have this other leaf that is going back. So even though this is dark, it really is not, I'm not going to paint it the darkest dark yet. Just enough to make the stems, the lighter areas, just pop a little bit. Let's get that perylene, and I'll just drop it on the edge. Let this kind of do its own thing. And push it around, and then leave it alone. Back to it. Just pulling out a couple little areas. Okay, I like what's going on here. This to the edge, perfect. Okay, so then I have this stem, and honestly, probably have more stems than I need. But let's just paint the negative space there. Throw in a little bit of that perylene, and we'll let it do its own thing. Great. This little space is right over here. Good. Maybe a little bit more sap green, and I will in this leaf. Now when I look at all these leaves and stems, I do see greens that lean more blue and all different colors, and definitely I'm tempted to put in all those colors, but I feel I would be breaking away from the point of my lesson today, so we'll just let that go. you're following along and you're looking at the photo and you're thinking, wow, I don't really see that drawing. Well, I am somewhat like kind of making it up as I go along, but the photo is really my inspiration. So I'm hoping that everything just works out. All right, I know it will. Okay, I kind of like what's going on within here. I think I'll leave that and I'll move over to this section, and then eventually I'll go back and revisit over here. All right, so again, I'm mixing some sap green with my perylene green. I think it's giving me kind of this neutral, darker green. I don't want to go super dark, only because I can always get darker, but it's just kind of a pain if you have to remove color or value. So keep it, don't go your darkest dark yet. And again, I'm just going to form each stem or leaf by thinking about the negative space. Just join that with water and pull it down. And I also think just right over here, just put a damp brush through that, and I feel like that looks really nice. All right, let's just keep moving. This gets darker. Almost there. Just going to get some sap green. Some of these are bright. These negative spaces are bright. Maybe have a little bit more yellow in them. That looks pretty. Okay. Okay, I really like what I see going on there. I'm going to run just a very light shadow right down the edge there. And I'll just try to see if I can find an edge over here. It is maybe a little bit of a lighter cast shadow. Okay, we're going to leave that for now. So what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to dry this, and then I'll move over to the radishes. Maybe we'll come back and add a few details over here. Maybe I'll clean up the string a little bit, and we'll talk about that. All right, so, okay, so now let's move over to the radishes. Let's just see if I mix some of my Windsor red with some quinacridone. Ooh, that's pretty nice. Okay. So we're going to work this really one radish at a time. And so here we go. Let's come in and just get a little bit of color put into this one radish. just like this. Really, that makes a beautiful combination. Immediately, let's rinse out the brush, tap some water off, and just soften. We don't want a dried, hard edge. So we can get that really nice fullness around this. Just get water on my background. Okay, perfect. All right, look at that. And that already has just this beautiful shape going on. Okay, and now let's take some of our red and we'll mix it with some of the green. We get that kind of purpley color. And while this is still wet, again, you have to be working pretty quickly. Let's just drop that in, just like that. That's not bad. I'm just going to let it kind of spread and do its own thing. Get a little bit more of this nice combination here. Take some water off of my brush and just join this in. This looks pretty nice. Got some irregular shape to it. So I think about maybe some of that movement that we see, some of the curves. All right, I'm gonna let that one be. I went out of line a little bit. I don't know, it doesn't really matter because we'll get that really dark later anyway. So now I'm going to move from this radish. I can move to this one that's in between, maybe this one in between, and then I'll dry everything and then we'll get the other radishes. All right, so let's go back to our nice bright color. A lot of water in that, so let's take some of the water out with our brush, and then we'll come into our darker combination. We'll put that right in there. Okay. Well, that one was easy, and again, maybe it will end up getting a little bit darker, but we can always add more darks later on. Okay, so now let's get to this. Good. And then finally we have the radish that is here. I'll go back in with that nice pink mixture. Pretty. Get some darks. good. It's a good beginning. All right, so I am going to take a break and dry this, and then I'll come back and paint the 3 remaining radishes. Okay, so now all these are dry, and let's go again and mix some red with some quinacridone. Get that beautiful color, and just whoop, that is bright. And just paint around. Rinse it off. Get some water off of there, and just move these edges because we don't want to have a hard edge. We don't want it to dry up. You have to work really fast. Okay, now I'm just going to add a little bit more color to keep that edge moving. And we'll just bring this now. Get some of this. Just keep those edges moving. I really like that. There's kind of a blossom going on there, and I just think it works really well. Let's just extend that up. And then just add a little bit of water. Maybe keep some of that paper. I don't like this little spot here. Okay, that's pretty good. Let's move over to this one. So we'll just quickly, we'll paint around the highlight. And with a wet damp brush, we'll just drag through there so we don't have any hard edges. We'll have more color and pigment here. And then we'll get into this mixture and get some shadow. I think we need more paint. There are these cute little dimples and indentations. You can decide, they're fun to make. So you can decide if you want to put those in. There, that looks really nice. Okay, let's just let that one be for now, and we'll move on to this one. Now, the good thing is that you really truly get a lot of practice when you have to paint all of these. So even if the first one's not so good, by the time you get to the end, I don't know, I think the last one is usually perfect, hopefully. All right, so we'll get that highlight put in right there. We'll come through and add a little bit more color. Into our darker paint. That looks nice. There we go. And then you can decide, and this one has a lot of markings on it. You can decide if you want to put those markings in, if you want to wait until it dries and then add them in. And we're going to get this value here darker where the stems are. But overall, I feel like these really improved with color and everything, so we're going to dry those, but then I feel like I have to go back to this. I have to make this one darker and this one darker. So again, we're going to repeat the process. Okay. I hate to do this again, but I just feel that some of these just dried and they just look a little dull. Let's just add just a little bit more color and form. Again, put in a little bit of color and as quickly as possible, just go in and let's just soften those edges. And get this darker here. We have to babysit everything because it will creep, those edges will creep around when we're not looking. So I feel like that has a better relationship. I feel like this one, again, I could definitely pull in a lot of dark. So just in order to get something so it's darker, let's just get some thicker paint in. So here we go. Get some of that magenta. We'll add some red. Now, let's really get into that pearly green, and we'll put this over here. Okay, so that's a commitment to dark. It is. So let's just see what happens over here. I'm going to make that just darker in between. That's really nice. Okay. Maybe we'll add some of that darkness right here. Now I just want to pull that and soften it. And let's go over here. We'll fade that out. What a difference that makes. Let's get pretty dark too. Just added a little bit of water to soften those edges, and then come over here. Okay, I think that looks great. So this one was wet. I think it's still a little damp, so I'm going to leave that one for now. And this one definitely wet, but I'm going to take this big batch of dark, and I'm going to come through and just add a little bit of shadow over here. A lot of cast shadow happening. Just keep that edge moving. let's just soften this. And then we'll just soften this. Let's just water that down just a little bit and just see if I can bring some of that background value up into the string here. And then again on, I love this like string that's folded in front, so up on the other side, keeping that just pure paper. Yeah, that looks really, really nice. I like that. Still a little damp over there, but we'll see. I'm being lazy. Let's see. I'll try. If I get a blossom, you'll hear me scream. Hopefully I won't. Yeah, that looks better. Just want to soften this just a little bit. Yeah, that looks really nice. Okay. So I like what's going on with all of those, and I feel like they have some really nice volume. I still like, I'm thinking maybe that one could get a little darker. Maybe I need to let it go. There are some very subtle shadows that happen. We get a little bit more green put into this. We go back to that neutral gray, and I'm going to take some water out, and I just feel like possibly that little root will have maybe a little bit of a shadow happening, or a couple little things going on. Maybe over here I'll add just a little bit of a shadow. I like that. I love shadows. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'll add more green to this, and I want it to be fairly dark again. So probably as dark as what we're seeing there. Let's see how this works. Now over here, I'll just add some darks. And again, I talked about negative space painting. I'm going to rinse that. Just see that edge happening there. Now you have to babysit all the time. You have to be watching every little corner of your painting. All right, we'll add some of those stems in. Let's just put some of the stems a little bit darker here, and I really like that. This whole side will get much, much, much darker, and yeah, that looks really good. Spots in here, so we'll put in a little bit of a darker value, and then depending, we can always soften it. What I'll do on the side. Let's get some of those. So we roll, so a little bit darker there. I feel like these are okay though. We're going to get that value where it attaches a little bit darker, and where it attaches over here, get that a little bit darker, just like that. Okay. That's looking pretty nice. I think I like it. You can just continue on, and you can decide like how many of these darks you want to pull out, what you want to leave. Overall, I like that being kind of abstract. Maybe if I felt there was like a little bit of a vein that was showing in a leaf, and I wanted to show that vein, I could again paint the negative space, show off a vein that maybe is just a little bit lighter, like that. And, you know, and this leaf over here, maybe bring that up and do the same thing if I want to show just a nice center vein coming out of there. You can paint the negative space just like that. And you have a kind of beautiful image. Looks pretty too. All right, let's push that to the side and over here. Good. So let's go and address the string. I'm going to take and just soften that little area. I got sloppy, and that definitely will bother me. So let's just see if we can lift some of that up. So all I'm going to do with a string is go back to this like neutral gray color that I made with the greens and the reds, and in a very light way. And I'll just see if I can get just some of the lines or the spacing between each little piece of string. And again, as this comes down towards the shadow, it definitely gets darker, and the darker that gets, the more this little bit of string wrapping is going to show. So there. So I think that looks pretty good. I mean, we can fuss with that a lot if we want to, but I think overall it looks nice. Now you could decide if you wanted to add any texture to your radishes. You could come through and pick up some paint, and that's just like my complementary colors mixed together. I'm going to take some of my paint off so I have more of a dry brush or drier paint happening, and I can put in some of those little marks. Let's just see. Just going to see if we were to kind of hold this in a flat way like this and just push up and down just to get a little bit of texture. And if you're doing this, you do want to make sure that you're following the correct curve of the radish. So just make your own observations regarding that. But I like that. I think that looks really good. Up here, maybe it'll be something like that's somewhat similar. That's really pretty. There's kind of that center. And that's really nice. So, all right. I definitely could fuss with this a little bit more, but I think for today's lesson, we're all set. I always like to sign my paintings when I am done. We're a little squished over here, so maybe I'll kind of sign it over this way. And again, I'll use something that is like somewhat dark so it will show up. We'll just maybe put our signature right here. There we go. All right, that looks great. All right, let's see what we have. All right, I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I thank you so much for watching, and please remember to like and subscribe, leave me a comment. Anyway, see you next time. Bye for now.